Okay, hello. Welcome to the second in the Effective Writing Center series of workshops. I am Dan Gallagher, Director of the Effective Writing Center. Tonight's workshop is titled How to Turn Your Assignment Directions into a Writing Roadmap. The EWC is your GPS and is being presented by Laura Deffley, Zoe Fisher, and Suzanne Hill. Laura Deffley received a BA in English from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where she studied literature, psychology, and gender issues, and an MA from the University of Maryland at College Park. She has worked at both of her alma maters, as well as at New York University, and has been an online writing advisor for the Effective Writing Center at UMUC since 2008. Zoe Fisher is an adjunct writing professor at UMUC. Her academic achievements include an MBA and a Master's of Science in Healthcare Administration. Zoe has been with the EWC for 5 years. Suzanne Hill has taught composition, literary analysis, logic, and business writing at a state university and at a community college in both face-to-face and online formats. The Q&A app has been added to this Hangout, so just to respond to the first question we have up there, David, yes, we see that question. If you currently see the showcase view on the upper right, you should be able to select the Q&A view instead, and that will allow you to ask any questions. If you don't see it there, you might see it on the menu on the left-hand side of your screen. Feel free to type in questions during the workshop, and we'll periodically pause to allow time for responses to questions, and then we'll save some time at the end as well. This workshop will be archived for future viewing in the Effective Writing Center's Google Plus community. And now, to begin tonight's workshop, I am going to turn it over to Laura Deffley.
Thank you, Dan. I'm going to share my desktop so I can show everyone our presentation. Please let me know when you see the file and my screen.
I can see it.
Oh, you can see it? Oh, thank you. Thank you, Suzanne. Okay. I'm going to go into the slideshow mode now. All right. Oh.
Yep.
Let me open the file again. All right. I apologize. It appears that my computer keeps crashing the file even though it was working earlier today. All right, I apologize again. I don't know why the PowerPoint keeps crashing on my computer. Would someone else be able to share it that I emailed it to earlier?
Give me one moment and I'll pull it up.
Thank you, Dan.
We apologize for the delay.
I apologize.
We should be working in just a moment. Okay, are we seeing it now?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Dan.
So just let me know when you need me to advance the slide.
Well, you did such a wonderful job introducing us. I think we can go to the next slide. All right. So, has this ever happened to you? Your professor said your paper was well written, but didn't meet all of the assignment requirements. Welcome to the wonderful world of assignment decoding. Here's the secret hidden in the decoder ring. Each time a teacher writes an assignment, he or she has in mind the perfect response, the one that meets all the requirements. It's your job as a student to deliver that response. Right now, You're probably asking yourself, how do I do that? The answer? There are many different ways to approach decoding your assignment directions. We are going to discuss 3 different assignment types and some strategies you can use to figure out what you need to do. First, Suzanne is going to help you unlock the purpose of the assignment by discussing keywords, specifically verbs, in the directions. You can go on to Suzanne's verbs.
Okay, great. So yes, when you're decoding your assignment, you would look for verbs. They're your keywords. They're actually your directives for fulfilling your essay or your assignment. For example, the term discuss. This appears often in essay questions, and it tells you to analyze carefully and to present pros and cons. It calls for a complete and entailed answer. And usually, or I can often use personal opinion language here because often the question is asking me what I think. So first-person point of view is often acceptable, but I would avoid starting your paper with a sentence like, in this essay I will discuss, because there are such better ways to write a thesis statement. Another verb would be describe, and here you would give the physical qualities of a person, place, or object, or give the emotional characteristics of an idea. You would recount, characterize, sketch, or give details. Often this involves writing in narrative form, and it involves using all 5 of your senses to give the concrete details and to tell the story in your own voice. You want to make sure, as with just about any assignment, that your essay has a point. You want to describe what you learned and why the audience should care. Another verb that's important or that's often used is to define or identify. You would be writing about what makes the subject unique. Why is the subject different from closely related topics? You want to give examples, synonyms, antonyms, etymology, or dictionary definitions, which might be a place to start, but definitely give your own definition. This is going to be probably most interesting to your reader, your own personal definition. You want to explain where and when this topic occurs, give your reader an idea of the topic by telling us what it's not, or in other words, describe the opposite. And this is basically writing that explains what a term means. You could ask yourself, which examples would best help my reader understand this term? What examples would most appeal to my readers? Would a brief story reveal the term's meaning? And when you're doing your definition, don't use examples that wouldn't support the definition, but just stick to discussing the definition. Hopefully you're interested in the topic, you're able to pick a subject that you're familiar with and interested in, and can also add your own personal experience in the matter, whatever it is that you're going to define. You can move on to the next slide. Another verb we see often is explain or consider, and here you want to give reasons why or examples of how something happened. Clarify it by explaining how it functions, how to do it, what are its causes and effects. Here you're informing the readers about something they don't know, and we read explaining type of essays all the time. Most of what we know comes from having something explained to us by other people. For example, the topic time management for college students. Here you would explain how students can better manage their time to have less stress and better grades. Almost every profession requires this kind of writing. In fact, the higher you move up in your profession, typically the more you'll have to use writing that explains. Another verb, to illustrate. This is to emphasize specific examples or tell stories that explain the topic. You might be presenting a figure, a picture, a diagram, a concrete example, or a story. An example could be gender stereotypes still exist in the professional world, and here you might give examples from your research, from your textbook, from real life, from your own personal point of view, these type of examples that can help prove your point. And in an essay that illustrates, you want to show rather than tell. Analyze is another Important verb, here you break the subject into its parts. This is to help your reader better understand a subject. An analysis is not usually a disagreement with the subject, but rather a balanced, logical look at the subject to interpret information. And it might help if you can find out in an essay of analysis if you should argue, evaluate, state a conclusion, give your opinion. Classify means to organize the subject into its various categories, sort them, and I recommend having a single organizing principle for all the categories. Give examples that fit into each category, and this will help your paper be unified. And also think about things that should or should not be placed in a particular category so that the essay makes sense. Next slide. Another verb is, or verbs, compare and contrast. And here you'd want to find two important similarities and differences, at least two, between subjects. If you're asked to compare, then you would emphasize similarities. If you're asked to contrast, then emphasize the differences. So here you might want to find out, does my instructor want me to compare and contrast, or am I being asked to do only one? And unless you're asked to do research as part of your comparison contrast, choose something that you're comfortable discussing. You'll be discussing this topic probably at length and looking at it in very many points of view and areas of focus. To criticize, this means to discuss the positives and the negatives of the subject. You're expressing your judgment. You're giving a detached evaluation, discussing the limitations, the good points, the contributions of the plan, or the project, or the work. Ask yourself, are there other possible positions on this matter? And decide on your own position. To outline means to organize your subject by its topics, stages, main ideas, or points. This is an organized description, and it's probably best to leave out minor details. Another verb, to research. This is to declare a stance on a topic and provide evidence from your reading that backs your statement. Also tell what experts have to say. Do they agree with you, disagree with you, why or why not? Research is a natural daily activity. We do it all the time to gather information. Academic research is like this ordinary research, but it's more disciplined in its methodology. Why do instructors have us write research papers? Well, the hope is that you can ask questions and seek answers from research already done and contribute to the existing scholarship. And if you can, choose a topic that interests and challenges you so you can be enthusiastic about it, and select a subject that you can manage. You don't want a subject that's too technical, too specialized, too narrow. And another important thing with a research paper, leave yourself enough time. And certainly there are other verbs that you could come across in the description of an assignment. You might be asked to review, to summarize, to interpret, but these are some main verbs that I just wanted to go over. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. As you can see, what your instructor wants you to do varies by what verbs he or she chooses to use. Does anyone have any questions about the verbs that Suzanne just went over? Oh, and Dan, you can show the next slide.
I am not seeing any questions at this point, but if people who are viewing do have questions, feel free to type them in and we will get to them in our next break.
Thank you, Dan. Our first example is from EDCP 103 and shows how some instructors actually give you an outline within their directions. You just have to spot it so you can use it. Now over to you, Zoe.
When a professor gives me an assignment, the first thing I ask myself is, what is he or she asking me to do? Then I turn to the assignment instructions to get the answer. Now let's face it, this is not always an easy task. There have been times where I have read the instructions, and read the instructions again, only to find that I have no clue what the professor wants. When that happens, I reach out to the professor for clarification, but in most cases, the assignment instructions are clear. And not only are the instructions clear, but I get a bonus. My outline is already prepared. All I have to do is read the assignment instructions and see the gift in the form of an outline my professor gave to me. Next slide, please. And then there should be a video.
Just give me one moment on the video. Seems like it's taking a second to load. Just 1 second. Okay, video is playing. Zoe, are you seeing the video?
Dan, can you rewind it, please?
Sure. Okay, are we ready?
Yes. The professor clearly communicates in these assignment instructions that the assignment is an essay of 5 paragraphs, should be at least 600 to 1,000 words, and that I must select from the following topics. Next, the professor lists exactly what I need to include in paragraphs 1 through 5. In the first paragraph, the professor mentions that I should introduce my essay, and that the last sentence will be a thesis statement that states the main point of the essay. The professor also mentions that we will cover strategies for introductions and thesis statements in class, so I'll just make note to look out for those discussions. The professor writes that paragraph 2 must discuss the first point supporting the thesis statement, paragraph 3 must discuss the second point, and paragraph 4 must discuss the third point. The professor then offers some guidelines for paragraphs 2 through 4. Each will begin with the topic sentence introducing the point to be discussed. Because these paragraphs are all in support of the thesis stated in the introduction, the topic sentence for paragraphs 2 through 4 should use transition phrases such as one benefit or the most important reward. I will copy this information next to paragraphs 2 through 4 to serve as a reminder that each topic sentence should begin with a transition phrase similar to those. I will follow that same process with the rest of the assignment guidelines. The professor signals that paragraph 5 will conclude the essay and goes on to offer some tips that will assist me with writing the conclusion. I will be sure to copy this information directly into my outline. At this point, I've reviewed and noted the details I must include in my draft. These are the techniques I use to create what I call a skeleton outline for my writing assignments. I analyze the information the professor gives me in the assignment directions, note the requirements, and I create an outline similar to this one. As you can see, this outline was developed directly from the professor's instructions. I included my topic, my word limitations, and the information the professor provided for each of the 5 paragraphs. This is all I really need to get started with my first writing draft, with my first writing assignment for this draft. I hope you found this information helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions about this process.
Okay, still seeing no questions at this point. Again, if you have questions, feel free to add them in the Q&A, which you can access either on the left-hand menu or on the top right, and drop us a question. We will answer at the next break. At this point, we'll continue.
Hey, Dan, you can go to the next slide. So now Suzanne is going to go over how to plan and write an essay that describes.
Okay, thank you. So recently I got a request from a student asking how to get started on his paper, how to organize it, and would it need a thesis statement. And here is the assignment. This was for HSMN 610 Concepts in Homeland Security class. An essay assignment, short paper, 4 to 5 pages, that briefly describes the appropriate roles of individual citizens, government at all levels, that's local, state, and federal, the not-for-profit sector, the military, and the private sector, as they all relate to the Department of Homeland Security. Consult and cite at least 3 peer-reviewed journal articles in addition to other credible sources of information. So those were the instructions. And the student asked, how do I organize this paper? Do I need a thesis statement? So the first thing we talked about was, what is the instructor looking for? And how should the paper be structured? The main verb here that we see is describe. So we talked about the paper would entail going into detail about each of the groups that are mentioned and defining their roles regarding security and describing how they conduct this role. I think you can move to the next slide. And the groups, again, include individual citizens, the government at all levels, the not-for-profit sector, the military, and the private sector. We decided that it wasn't necessarily important to follow that order that was given by the instructor when putting the paper together, because it might depend on the student's particular interest. We thought it would be good to follow an order that makes sense for the topic, for what is found during research, for what the student wants to say to the reader about these groups. For instance, it may make sense to build up to the group that is most interesting and perhaps put individual citizens last. The student thought that they perhaps had the most unique role of all. Another student might think maybe it's the federal government with its immense powers that is the most interesting and might build up to that role. But in this case, we decided that they'd be sort of saving the most interesting role until last or building up to that, and that would be a method of organization for getting started in structuring this paper. And when talking about the levels of government, he was going to probably start with local government because they have maybe the smallest or least impactful role, build to the state government and its role, then go on to the federal government. Next, we thought he should establish a connection between these groups, try showing how they're related or how one leads to the next, and use transitions between. That would be a phrase showing how one is related to the next. His big question was, should this paper have, or he had another question, should this paper have a thesis statement? And yes, I believe every academic paper should have a thesis statement. Maybe the typical thesis statement where you give your stance on a topic and then you state why or prove evidence to back up that stance might not make sense in this paper because this is asking to define roles. Instead, what overall statement about the topic and all these groups could you make? It sounds like the main idea is that each group, no matter how different, no matter how the role was different from the other groups, was looking to protect and detect. So the student decided this was a good, succinct way to state the main idea, which was protect and detect. These are the two charges the government has taken on in regards to looking out for terrorists since 9/11. So those two keywords would show the focus of the discussion, and then the paper would be unified around these two main ideas. Can you move on to the next slide? And this was the recommended outline that we ended up coming up with together, that to start with a title page that would have the important student and class and assignment information, an introductory paragraph that would end with the thesis statement, and the thesis statement would state the reasoning behind how all these different groups mentioned in the introduction are related in some way, perhaps that they are all looking to protect and detect. Next, he was going to include a paragraph in introducing Homeland Security, its role, its power, its reach, its uniquenesses. Then would come the body paragraphs of the paper, where he would describe each of the roles, and between each section have a transition to show how one group's related to the one that comes next, and show how each group is either similar or different. So this would give flow to the paper and build up to the most important, the strongest, or the most complex role. And in his case, that would probably be the individual citizens. And then last would be a concluding paragraph that summarizes the main idea that all these groups, no matter how different, have the same goal to defend our society. So that's how we sort of constructed that assignment from the instructions that were given. I think the next slide is to see if anyone has any questions.
Exactly. So after seeing Suzanne's methods and tips for breaking down an assignment, does anyone have any questions?
Still no questions at this point, so let's keep going, and if people have questions, then they can certainly ask them at any point, and we will answer them at the next break.
Great. Thank you, Dan. So we have one more example to share with you tonight. I will discuss how to create a checklist that will turn into a rough draft of your paper. So this following assignment from an upper-level writing course has a lot of components to keep track of while planning out your approach. As you can see, the assignment directions link this final project to an earlier assignment in the course where students had to identify and request permission to write about a problem and deliver a solution. This research report proposes the recommended solution. While recommending the solution, as you can see, the students need to explain the problem, provide evidence to support the solution, discuss resources like funding, provide an estimated outline, and explain the benefits of the solution, as well as include 3 to 5 sources. Next slide, please. However, before you can even start recommending the solution, you need to make sure the report has 4 components at the beginning. So you would need an attractive cover page, a transmittal letter or memo, a table of contents, and an executive summary that is no longer than 1 page. Next slide, please. Then, in the report, you have to make sure that you have not only included the necessary information, but that you also format it correctly. For example, you'll need headings, in-text citations, at least 1 well-placed graphic, and a discussion of an alternative recommendation in addition to the conclusion in the paper. Next slide, please. And at the end of the report, you need to remember to cite your sources on a references page, as well as keep in mind how many words the report has to be and the way the graphic should convey data. Upon first reading these directions, you may feel a bit overwhelmed, and that's okay. Take a deep breath. It may not seem like it, but the instructor has already done a lot of the organizational work for you by providing what she or he wants using bullet points. Next slide, please. So step 1, paste bullets into paper. So similar to what my colleague Zoe did in the first example, please open up a new document and paste all those bullets onto the first page. Now you have all the elements you need from the directions to complete the information in the correct order. Next slide, please. Step 2 is add additional directions. So then you're going to paste the specific directions that you need to remember about each particular section. It helps to change the font color of the directions so you remember to delete them after you have completed your draft. Next slide, please. Step 3, create headings. As you add in directions, you can start to create headings and subheadings that will remain in the paper, but the elements that will remain in the paper in black. By using this approach to assignments, you are creating a checklist that can be turned into your rough draft. Thus, you are able to stay on track with what is required without having to keep all the requirements in your head, which would be impossible. Also, this gives you the freedom to work on elements in the order that makes the most sense. As Suzanne noted in her example, you do not have to write about all the elements in the order they are originally listed. In fact, you wouldn't be able to write this report's executive summary until you have already written the full report, because it's hard to summarize something that does not exist yet. Next slide. After seeing my checklist method, do you have any questions? Or do you have any questions about any other elements earlier in the presentation?
I'm not seeing any questions at this point, but why don't we wait just a minute or two and see if anybody is still listening and processing and has a question to ask.
That sounds great. And for anyone who is watching this video after this has been broadcast, as you can see, the email address for the Writing Center is on this slide. So if you do have questions after the broadcast, you can always email them to writingcenter@umuc.edu.
And you can also feel free to post any questions directly below this video wherever you found it. If you found it in our Google Plus community, you should be able to post a comment to it, and we will answer, we respond to any comments right there.
And while we're waiting for questions, Dan, the last 2 slides have the image sources because we are citing our sources like we tell students to do if anyone is interested in where we found our images.
And we do have a question here. Could you tell us a little bit about how the EWC helps assist students on creating rough outlines for assignments?
I would be happy to do so unless Suzanne or Zoe would like to take that question.
Go ahead, Laura. Sounds good.
Okay. The EWC offers 2 services that students can use. If they log in through their myumUC.edu account, there's a Submit to Writing Center link on the left side of the page. Through that link, they can either choose to work with an advisor asynchronously and receive written feedback, or synchronously and essentially schedule an appointment to meet with an advisor live online. In either the written feedback situation or the in-person situation, the student has the opportunity to upload the assignment directions as well as any comments or questions they have and any pieces of a draft that they might have started. Then, either through written feedback or through verbal feedback in a meeting, the advisor can work with the student to start their outline. If it's in a meeting, they can bounce ideas off each other and talk about what the student understands and doesn't understand, what the student thinks the instructor wants. If it is written feedback, the advisor will take the written directions that the student provided and do his or her best to provide some ideas and also strategies like the ones provided in this video.
Great.
Thank you, Laura.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions at this point. Just to reiterate, if you're watching this video later and you have questions, feel free to contact the EWC at this email address, or if you are viewing this video on YouTube or on the EWC's Google Plus community, just post a comment and we will get back to you that way. I think that will wrap it up for this evening. So I want to thank Laura Deffley, Suzanne Hill, Zoe Fisher for a very informative discussion. Thank you to everyone who attended live. We hope to see you again, and best of luck to you and your future writing projects.